Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask questions of the Secretary, I'd like to ask the indulgence of the committee to introduce two guests that I've brought here today. Alejandra Duran Areola is a second-year student at Loyola University School of Medicine in Chicago. Alejandra, would you please stand? Alejandra grew up in Savannah, Georgia. In addition to medical school, she volunteers at a clinic educating uninsured patients about disease prevention. Her dream is to become an OB/GYN working in underserved communities. She is protected by DACA. Thank you very much, Alejandra, for being here. Her future is in doubt. Without the protection of DACA, she does not have a legal permission to work in America. You cannot become a doctor without a residency. A residency is a job. If DACA is eliminated and her protection is eliminated and her right to work is eliminated, then her future as a doctor is in doubt. John Magdaleno, would you please stand? John came from Venezuela at the age of 9. In high school, he was commander of the Air Honor Society and junior ROTC. He graduated from Georgia Tech, one of the best engineering schools in America, with a degree in chemical and biomolecular engineering with the highest honors. He now works as a chemical engineer. His dream is to serve in the United States military. John, thanks for being here. That's what this debate is all about. That's what DACA is all about. There's been a lot of talk about terrorists and threats to America. We stand as one, not as Democrats or Republican, but as one, in saying let's keep America safe. But for goodness sakes, not at the expense of young people like the two I just introduced. That is what this conversation and debate is all about. Madam Secretary, I hope you remember me. We were together at 2 meetings last week. I would like to ask you about one of those meetings. It occurred about noon on January the 11th. You were a few minutes late, I know, and asked forgiveness, but you were called at the last minute to come and attend. Some things were said at that meeting which I believe we have to address today. People across the United States and around the world want to know what this president believes should be our priorities when it comes to immigration. I'm going to ask you, as best you can, to recall what you heard the president say when it came to those priorities. What do you remember the president saying about immigration from African countries to the United States?
What I heard him saying was that he'd like to move away from a country-based quota system to a merit-based system. So it shouldn't matter where you're from, it should matter what you can contribute to the United States.
How did he characterize those countries in Africa?
I don't specifically remember a categorization of countries in Africa. I think what he was saying is, as far as best I could tell, and as you know, there were about a dozen people in the room, there were a lot of cross conversations, there was a lot of rough talk by a lot of people in the room. But what I understood him to be saying is, let's move away from the countries and let's look at the individual and make sure that those we bring here can contribute to our society.
Do you remember the president saying expressly, I want more Europeans, why can't we have more immigrants from Norway?
I do remember him asking about the concept of underrepresented countries as a fix. This was in the conversation about removing the diversity lottery and how we could reallocate that. And I do remember him asking, if we do that and we then assign those to countries that are unrepresented, aren't we just continuing non-merit-based immigration? So from that perspective, I think he did ask, would that cover European countries, or by its nature, would that mean that we are further establishing immigration to purposefully exclude Europeans?
What did the president say about immigrants from Norway?
I heard him repeating what he had learned in a meeting before, that they are industrious, that they are a hardworking country, they don't have much crime there, they don't have much debt. I think in general, I just heard him giving compliments to Norway. You
said on Fox News that the president used strong language. What was that strong language?
Let's see, strong language, there was, apologies, I don't remember a specific word. What I was struck with, frankly, as I'm sure you were as well, was just the general profanity that was used in the room by almost everyone.
Did you hear me use profanity?
No, sir, neither did I.
Did you hear Senator Graham use profanity?
I did hear tough language from Senator Graham, yes, sir.
What did he say?
He used tough language. He was impassioned. I think he was feeling very strongly about the issue, as was everyone in the room. And to underscore a point, I think he was using some strong language.
Do you recall that the strong language he used repeated exactly what the president had said prior to that?
I remember specific cuss words being used by a variety of members.
I'm not going to ask you to say those words here, but I will just say for the record, Senator Graham spoke up in a way that I respect very much, countering what the president had said about countries in Africa, reminding the president that his family did not come to America with great skills or wealth, but they came here as most families do, looking for a chance to prove themselves and make this a better nation. And in defense of Senator Graham, his strong words repeated exactly the words used by the president, which you cannot remember. Let me ask you another question.
If I just could, sir, I do want to say that I greatly appreciate not only Senator Graham's leadership, but yours as well. I know you're both very passionate about this. As you know, afterwards I approached you and asked that I'm happy to come talk to you anytime to try to work on this deal. I do think that Senator Graham very impassionately described what he believes America is about and what we should move towards. Yes, I agree with that.
Do you support a path to citizenship for DACA recipients and those who were in the DREAM Act?
I think we have to find a permanent solution. Yes, sir.
I hate that phrase, permanent solution. Do you support a path to citizenship?
I believe that is part of the discussion, and to make sure that we don't continue temporary populations that continue to exist, we should talk about that. I'm not here to get in front of the president or any final decisions on that particular issue, but yes, I'm happy to discuss it.
Do you recall the president saying that he wanted $20 billion now and he would build this wall within 1 year?
I do remember him saying that he was concerned that given the appropriation cycle, that any deal that we made now would be limited to this year's appropriation. I remember him asking, is there a way to authorize the full down payment of the wall such that we could have assurances that we could in fact build it?
So let's take a look at what your department has done when it comes to building walls. As of December the 6th, 2017, less than 1% of the $341 million appropriated for 40 miles of replacement funding had been expended. Actual construction has yet to begin on money appropriated in the last fiscal year. So is the president realistic when he says he wants $20 billion so he can build the wall in 1 year?
I think the president is encouraging us to go as quickly as we can. As you know, it's a very complicated issue, building the wall, for a whole variety of reasons. What we're doing right now is we are testing and evaluating those prototypes, and we'll continue to determine not only the design, but what's best per some of the other senators' comments for any particular part of the border, because it will be different. We need a full toolkit.
Madam Secretary, the president made it clear in that meeting that one of the conditions for his assent or agreement to protect DACA was $20 billion so he could build this wall in 1 year. The fate of John and Alejandra lies in the balance here. The president is insisting on something that is physically, legally impossible as a condition for him to give them a chance to be here in the United States legally. Now, you've seen, because you commented on it, Fox News, the proposal, which Senator Graham and I, as well as 4 other senators, have made on a bipartisan basis, and you've rejected it. You said at one point, I believe, that, let me see if I quote here, there's nothing in there that would prevent us from getting here again. Are you aware of the fact that included in this proposal is the entire request of the administration for border security in this fiscal year? $1.6 billion for walls and barriers and fences, and another $1 billion for technology, exactly what you asked for. If you don't believe this is going to solve the problem, which is what you said on Fox News, why did the administration request it in the first place?
Well, sir, that's not all we requested, as you know. We also requested to close the loopholes that serve as the pull factors that continue to exacerbate the problem. I cannot apprehend if I cannot remove. That's not border security.
Let me add, the first meeting we had last week, we agreed, and the president agreed, there would be 2 phases to this conversation. The first, immediately to deal with the DACA challenge and the 3 other elements the president
including
raised.
Border security, sir.
Including border security, every penny that you asked for. And then the president said phase 2 goes into comprehensive immigration reform, many of the issues which you described as must-haves. We understand that. To put the entire burden of immigration reform on the shoulders of these DACA recipients is fundamentally unfair, not practical, and jeopardizes their future and their lives. What we're trying to do is an honest, bipartisan approach to deal with the first phase of this, and you have rejected it.
I thank you for your passion. I hope you understand mine. I cannot agree to a deal that does not give the tools and resources to the men and women of Department of Homeland Security to do the job you have asked them to do.
We gave you every penny you asked for.
Sir, it's not the pennies.
Yeah.
It's closing the loopholes.
Then can we cut back on some of this money because we can sure use it?
We need the wall, too. The wall works, as you know. It's part of border security.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Madam Secretary, I want to try to put in context a timetable, because here's what we face as I understand it. Because of the California court decision, your agency is opening for those who previously were protected by DACA and whose protection or registration has come to an end, an opportunity to reapply. Is that correct? Yes. You turn your mic.
Sorry, yes, sir.
Okay. And we also know that come March 5th, the President has said the program's over. So those who would have expiring DACA protection as of March 5th would not be able, under the President's directive of September 5th, to apply for new DACA status. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you have said, and I assume it reflects the administration, that you do not believe President Trump has the authority to extend the March 5th deadline.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We also have heard 2 weeks ago from your agency that any changes to DACA that we decide to go forward with will take several months, I think they said 6 months, to implement. Have you heard that?
I have not.
I think that's true. The point I'm getting to is this. This is a matter of urgency. I hope you agree.
I do.
And this week, we think, is a critical week. Do you know what the position of the administration is on the California decision? Are they going to accept it, or are they going to appeal it?
I don't. Last I checked in with the Department of Justice, they were considering their options. I don't have an update.
Should they choose to appeal it, it could end in a matter of hours. It is possible, because I believe it's injunctive relief that has led to this decision, and a higher court can decide differently on that. Do you understand that as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The point I want to get back to from Lindsey Graham, there are many things we can talk about. I'm going to, just in a minute or two, address one issue. We are talking about 2 phases. That's what the President said on Tuesday of last week. We believe, Senator Graham and I and many others, there are lots of big issues involving immigration, involving security, but we also believe there's a sense of urgency and immediacy to dealing with DACA and to doing it in a fashion where the President's checklist of 4 items are included. That's why we've brought forward this bipartisan approach. So I just urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, join with us in bringing this matter forward this week. We know, I think we know, the parameters of what we are discussing, and we should act with that sense of urgency. One of the things on your must-have list, which you passed out on Tuesday and it brought to us again today in a different form, relates to asylum protection. And you use the example of a child at the border being coached to use the words credible fear, and that triggers a certain reaction. But I would like to call your attention to something that I hope can add another perspective. It's an article entitled, "When Deportation is a Death Sentence." It was written by Sarah Stillman, published in The New Yorker. I want you to read it. I hope you'll read it, because it talks about what happens when the agents who are involved in this don't ask the right question, don't hear the answer, and send many women back to their death. And they go through cataloging where that has occurred. There is a requirement, as I understand it, in the CBP manual that before deportation, a person must be asked, do you have any fear or concern about being returned to your home country or being removed from the United States? Would you be harmed if you return? And that the agent asking the question has no authority to evaluate the validity of that fear. Instead, if the answer is in the affirmative, they're referred to an asylum officer. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. They're then told in the same manual, err on the side of caution, apply the criterion generously. Yet it turns out an ACLU report in 2014, now this is before your time, found that 55% of those who were stopped and questioned were not asked that critical question, and that of those who ended up saying affirmatively they were concerned, only 40% were protected and allowed to stay. It's known, I'm thinking, I hope you'll concede, asylum seekers are not entitled to lawyers. Children as young as 3 years of age have been asked to represent themselves. With a lawyer in the process, someone seeking asylum has 5 times the likelihood that they'll be allowed to stay in the United States. So when you get into the area of asylum and making this quicker, you also run the risk that you're sending people to their death. I'm not exaggerating, because we know the Central American countries have, unfortunately, the highest murder rates in the world. And the gang activity down there that we fear coming to the United States is rampant down there. How would you balance that? How would you address those two concerns?
Well, I would look at them separately. First of all, I do look forward to reading this article and certainly to see what we have done since 2014 to ensure that the manual and those questions are asked and are followed up on appropriately. We have a duty to protect those who are in fear of their life. I stand very firmly on that. So I'm happy to work with you if there's anything else we can do, or if it's not clear, we need to do both of those.
Thank you. I'll just conclude by saying refugee and asylum officers have a dual mission, according to one of their own who stated this: identify people who aren't refugees and who just might harm us, but also to identify and protect real refugees. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Senator HIRONO.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, how would it be possible for someone who entered this country through the visa lottery program and who was a legal permanent resident but had not yet gotten his U.S. citizenship to be responsible for sponsoring 23 other people for visas in the space of 7 years?
As an LPR, you have the ability to sponsor.
Is it possible to sponsor 23 others in a span of 7 years? Let me put this in a context, because President Trump has been very vocal about the diversity lottery program as well as the chain migration, and he cited numerous times at the meeting that I was at in the White House on Thursday about a horrible terror attack which happened on the West Side Highway in New York City, and several times he mentioned that the attacker, who was admitted through the diversity visa program, was responsible for 23 other immigrants entering the U.S. So I would like to get the factual basis for the president's assertion that this person has managed to bring in 23 other people into the country, because this is what the president repeated many times. Do you have that information, or can you get me that?
I don't have it in front of me. I'm happy to provide it. As you know, there's no ceiling on the number of people, to my knowledge, there's no ceiling on the number of people that you can sponsor, but happy to provide you the information.
So there seems to be this misconception about so-called chain migration, that somehow someone can bring in an entire family tree, which includes just about anybody you can think of, and that is not how migration works, because you have different groupings of family members that can come in under that kind of system. So I would really like to get the factual basis for what the president was asserting as to this particular immigrant who came to this country. Somehow I don't think that there is a factual basis. So turning to unaccompanied minors who are apprehended at the border and who are released to HHS, you stated that, and they do have to show up for their deportation hearings. You said that 90% of them do not show up?
Yes, ma'am, and not just to deportation hearings per se, but just to their initial hearing before that, yes.
So the statistics from the Executive Office of Immigration Review shows that the vast majority of children do show up, and almost every child who has legal representation does show up. So I co-sponsored a bill introduced by Senator Reid last Congress, and I'm introducing it again this Congress, that would require the government to appoint counsel to unaccompanied children coming across our border. And we know that there are children as young as 3 or 4, and I have been to immigration court where there are these young children. It is very true that if they are accompanied by a lawyer, that they are more likely to succeed in their requests for asylum. or whatever the refugee status. So if you would like to see all the children return for their hearings, don't you agree that providing counsel is a good way to do that?
We have a duty to protect the children that come here, ma'am. So I'm happy to work with you and look at the proposal.
I think one of the ways is to ensure that they be provided counsel, because you can hardly expect 4-, 5-, 6-year-old children to be able to represent themselves in these proceedings. I want to turn to the priorities, deportation priorities that you have. And you indicated that those who have final orders for removal, even those people who have not been convicted of any criminal, no criminal convictions, that they may have final orders of removal. And many of them, a number of them, have received waivers from your department, waivers against deportation. So, you know, nobody's arguing that we should not be deporting people with criminal convictions, but do you consider that anyone who has a deportation order, regardless of what the basis for that order was and where waivers have been granted in the past, should not be looked at and provided waivers? Because we know of examples of in Hawaii, there was a coffee farmer who had married an American citizen who had American children who was deported, and he had received a number of waivers. So is it not within the authority of your department to grant these waivers?
Ma'am, we look at each case on a case-by-case basis. What I was trying to assert before, and I'll reassert now, is we can't ignore the law. So if they've gone through all of the courts, they've exhausted all possible appeals, and they have a final order of removal, we will remove
There are
them.
a number of people with final orders of removal who have had waivers of their deportation. Is it not within the authority of your department to grant these waivers?
We look at them case by case.
Yes or no? Do you have the authority to grant the waivers?
In some cases, yes.
Yes, you do. Thank you.
Senator Booker, before you talk, we've got, I said I had to quit around 2, maybe it's more like 2:10, so I've got you and Harris. Senator Coons, do you want 5 minutes? That's 15, so I hope that we can, that nobody else comes in here, because I'd like to get my questions asked. Go ahead, Senator Booker.
After I speak, I can Katie bar the door if you'd like me to, sir.
Go ahead.
All right.
Thank you. I'll trust you.
Thank you, sir. Just real quick, I, like you, agree that dangerous criminals, we should get them out of our country. But when you say that bucket of criminals, you're talking about people that could be low-level crimes from a decade ago. That still counts as a criminal, correct?
The ones that we target are criminal offenses. In other words, there are some civil offenses that would not fall within our top-tier prioritization.
But it's a felony for marijuana possession, say, that somebody might have done 10, 15 years ago. That's a criminal in your
yes,
definition.
Sir. Yes, sir.
And that person would be prioritized for deportation.
One of however many we agree on are here illegally, 11 million, yes.
Okay, you said earlier, and this might be a question for the record because I know you weren't in your position at this time, but you said earlier that the Customs Border Patrol follows court orders, correct?
Yes, sir.
And so I had a personal experience with this last year when I went to Dulles Airport during the first iteration of the Muslim ban. There was a temporary injunction from a federal judge requiring the Customs and Border Patrol to provide individuals affected by the executive order access to counsel. I was called to go up there because they were refusing to abide by that and provide counsel for those individuals. So as a question for the record, would you please explain to me, I was there myself, they refused to even talk to me or discuss it as I was holding the court order to let the people being detained. Could you please, for the record, I have yet to get an understanding of why Customs and Border Patrol was refusing to abide by a court order.
I'd be happy to look into that.
Thank you very much. On December 1st, 2017, Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General released a detailed report detailing the results of unannounced spot inspections of 6 ICE detention facilities. I'm sure this is a yes question, but you believe in the dignity of all human beings, correct?
Absolutely.
And that they should be treated with a certain level that respects that dignity and affirms their humanity. Well, the Inspector General's report raised serious questions regarding the treatment and the care of ICE detainees. The report stated, and I quote, "We identified problems that undermine the protection of detainees' rights, their humane treatment, and the provision of a safe and healthy environment. In light of this administration's highly aggressive posture towards the immigrant community and putting people into these facilities, it's very troubling to me that your own Inspector General would have a report detailing the United States of America treating others in an inhumane manner that's an assault to their dignity. And so can you affirm to me that you're aware of this report?
I am aware of this report, yes, sir.
And then what actions are you taking right now to address the concerns?
First of all, looking into both the recommendations and the facts provided. As you might know, the Homeland Security Advisory Council did its own review independently for the department just over a year ago, I guess at this point, on detention centers. I'd like to look at the recommendations from both to address any issues that remain and certainly any concerns of inhumane treatment.
Okay, and so you're saying that you're going to try to implement the recommendations of the report. Can you give me some kind of timeline or assurance? And
I'm happy to come and brief you myself, sir. I have not had an opportunity to understand the depth of any changes that might be necessary or whether the facts, I just need more information. As you said, it just came out in December. So I'd be happy to do that.
I'm really grateful, and I will take you up on that offer. On September 11th, right after the attacks, the federal government created the NSEER system, the National Security Entry and Exit Registration System. The program requires non-citizen visa holders from certain countries to register with the federal government. The registration process included fingerprinting, photo taking, interrogations. Once an individual was registered, NSEERS required the person to regularly check in with immigration officials. And finally, NSEERS monitors people who registered with the program to ensure that no one remained in the country longer than the law permitted them. Notably, the only people who had to register for the list were from Muslim countries, with the exception of North Korea. And so I'm wondering, do you believe that it is legal and in keeping with the values of our country enshrined in our Constitution to force people from Muslim nations to register their presence in the United States?
Based on the fact that they're Muslim, absolutely not.
I've introduced legislation trying to prevent that kind of registry from being created through NSEERS. Is that something that you'd be willing to commit to making sure that does not happen in terms of creating something akin to a Muslim registry?
Yes.
Thank you.